The stakes are rising in Myanmar as the military coup enters its fourth week. Protesters are gearing up to hold their biggest rally yet today, calling it their 5-2 Spring Revolution. Several shops and businesses plan to shut, and authorities issued a warning late last night, saying that by planning a big demonstration, protesters were inciting anarchy and pushing young people towards confrontation, where they will suffer loss of life. Social media is peppered with rallying calls to protest nationwide today. 5-2 is based on today's date, but does carry greater significance. It's said to be inspired by the 8888 pro-democracy uprising of 1988. And you look at live pictures now out of Dawei city in Myanmar. Dozens of people now marching along the streets. Protesters have been largely undeterred by the military's clampdown so far. They've been rallying for more than 2 consecutive weeks. Protesters have repeatedly defied a ban on public gatherings since the military seized power on the 1st of February. They want the release of detained leader Aung San Suu Kyi and the reinstatement of her government. Today they are turning up the heat, their anger stoked by the worst violence yet. At least 2 people were killed after security forces fired at a rally in Mandalay on Saturday. Before that, a student was shot in the head. According to posts on Twitter, the military is getting ready too, blocking roads leading to embassies overnight and shutting down the internet yet again nationwide. The blackout is scheduled to have been lifted by now, except for Yangon, which will see the shutdown last until 12 noon. That's 1:30 p.m. in Singapore, Hong Kong. This morning, the United States issuing yet another stern warning to Myanmar's military leaders. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the U.S. will continue to take firm action against authorities who crack down on opponents violently, and that it stands with the people of Myanmar. More on this, Leong joins us with the very latest. Authorities warning, as we just heard, warning protesters that they might suffer loss of life today if they go out and protest. What do you read into that, and will that warning do anything to stop protesters in any way?
Well, very quickly, Wesu, before I go into that, I want to point out that you mentioned earlier that there's an internet blackout in Myanmar, and for Yangon, the blackout is extended to 12 p.m. local time. But this is just how fast developments are coming through. I've been getting tweets and SMSs from friends, WhatsApp messages from friends saying that the internet blackout in Yangon has apparently been lifted at around 9 a.m. local time. Now, back to your question. You asked me what I read into this warning. Really, Wesu, there's nothing to read between the lines about this. Warning is as explicit as it can be. There will be loss of lives if people continue to push for this movement. And we don't even need to look back at past history in 2007 or 1988 to be reminded that the Myanmar army is capable of a violent crackdown where there are mass casualties. In fact, just last week in Mandalay, the second largest city in Myanmar, the police have already raised banners telling people there that if they don't disperse, they will use live rounds on them. And we have seen on Saturday, live rounds were used at a shipyard in Mandalay where 2 people had died. So really, this warning across Myanmar that was also broadcast on state TV yesterday is as explicit as it can get.
Wakit, just in case anyone misses that warning, of course, we've got what the UN is saying it's worried about, that a controversial military unit was deployed during the deadly shooting in Mandalay. That's, of course, the 33rd Light Infantry Division. What do you know about this Light Infantry Division, and that if it is deployed, what impact might it have on protests and protesters?
Well, Wesu, that is an elite force within the Myanmar army. They have various of these elite forces that are headquartered in parts of Myanmar. Local media as well as international media are reporting that the elite force was used and deployed in Mandalay. We don't have 100% confirmation, but like you said, UN has also cited those media reports. But to a civilian, whether or not you're from the elite force or a newbie soldier with a rifle, to them, as long as the rifle can fire live rounds on them, it is a threat. But on a diplomatic and international standpoint and from a strategic standpoint, if the Myanmar army were to use an elite force on civilians that are unarmed, it sends a very strong signal and it gives you an indication of the kind of tactics that the Myanmar army is going to be using on people.
All right, Waikid, so far, especially after the deaths we heard about over the weekend, there's been some criticism from several foreign quarters. Myanmar's foreign ministry rejecting international criticism, saying this is an internal affair, and to criticize counts as flagrant interference. Do you see the military government, after issuing this kind of messages, being open to any kind of mediation at all, whether it's formal or informal, to try to resolve this crisis?
This is a really great question, Wei Su, and for me, it's getting more and more difficult to understand and make sense of what the Myanmar Army's stance is and what it's saying, because don't forget, it has openly made several statements on one issue, and then afterwards, the actions that follow are completely opposite of what they say. For instance, I mentioned last week that the Myanmar Army chief had held a foreign affairs meeting in which he stressed that it's very important for Myanmar to maintain close ties with its neighbors. And then yesterday you have this statement which basically tells some foreign embassies in Yangon and foreign countries to not meddle in its in its internal affairs. And if you recall, the Myanmar Army chief had previously also stressed that this, and I quote, takeover is not the same as 1988 and 1962. Observers who read between the lines would say that perhaps he means that there won't be any violent crackdowns. Yet, yesterday, we see again this warning that the army has said that there will be loss of lives if people continue to push for this movement. So really, whether or not this will have any impact on international affairs between Myanmar and ASEAN, especially when ASEAN is calling for an informal talks on Myanmar, whether that will have an impact really remains to be seen.
Waikid will certainly be speaking to you then as we look across these events over the next few days. Leong, Waikid, thanks for all those updates and analysis for us.